Um, so yeah, welcome to our webinar on shared equity housing, home ownership options that can help your community meet its affordable housing needs. Um, Really excited for you all to be here, and I'm real excited for this webinar. I've been uh, talking to folks about it and planning it, and now it's here. My name is Melissa Levy. I'm with the National Association of Development Organizations with the Research Foundation, and really happy you're all here. This is a webinar and learning community opportunity presented by the Research Foundation through our EDD Community of Practice grant program, which is funded by the Economic Development Administration. I want to just give do a little housekeeping before I pass it along. Please feel free to put any questions or comments in I think it's the chat box, but I think there's a question and answer box too. Either way, we'll find it. A recording will be made available at the NATO website. There is a post-webinar survey just for us to know how it went and what else we can be doing. So please, it's really short. I really hope you'll just do that. It's just a few questions. And if you have any questions or want to talk about wealth creation or the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm Melissa. Just some quick basics on NATO and the NATO Research Foundation. NATO provides advocacy, education, research, and training for the nation's regional development organizations. And the foundation provides education, research, and training that are specifically designed for regional development organization staff and board members. Uh, and please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat too. I don't see why we can't do that. Again, this is part of the Economic Development District Community of Practice. You can find information at that website. There's all sorts of written reports and case studies and other webinars. And yeah, and this is me, so feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. My work at NATO is focused on wealth creation, and before I pass along to Mary, I'm just gonna do a very quick overview of the principles of wealth creation. Wealth creation is a economic development strategy that's really focused on connecting regions' assets to market opportunities. And these are the really key principles of wealth creation. One is to create wealth broadly defined. We have 8 forms of wealth that we talk about and aspire to do no harm to any of them. The second is about rooting wealth in local people, places, and firms through regional ownership, control, and influence. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And then finally, the third principle is about building lasting livelihoods by intentionally including people and firms on the economic and social margins in those market opportunities. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'm really excited to introduce Mary Griffin, who's the Senior Advisor to the Cooperative Development Foundation, and she has been just instrumental to putting this all together, and I'm really excited to hear what she and her panel have to say. So welcome, Mary. And you're muted just in case you were talking.
Sorry, when you share, you sort of lose that. I lost sight of the mute function. Okay, there we are. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, NATO and NATO Research Foundation. We're just happy to be able to do outreach and to be able to have this discussion. I know how keeping wealth local is so important in so many communities, and shared equity housing models are sort of perfectly aligned with that. So today we're kind of going to give you an introduction, so you'll sort of know if you're interested, where to go, who to talk to. And I'm here with uh, my colleagues Ariel Hirsch from UHAB, James Yellen from Grounded Solutions Network and David Sanchez from Rock USA, and they'll all introduce themselves when they introduce the models they're going to talk about. So a little bit on Cooperative Development Foundation, our affordable housing initiative. We're a 501c3 national organization that has been around for over 80 years, and we have a pretty simple mission, and that is to promote cooperative education and development. So we work cross-sector, whether it's ag co-ops, worker co-ops, food co-ops, and housing co-ops, and we have a focus on affordable housing co-ops now, and have been involved with for a long time with supporting resident-owned communities and limited equity cooperatives to help make sure people have permanently affordable housing. So we're basically here to promote the preservation and development of these permanently affordable housing models, and to help educate policymakers and folks like you, and demonstrate how shared equity can advance housing stability, racial equity, and other outcomes. So with that, what is shared equity housing? There's a lot of different definitions of it, and so we just came upon this to sort of have something, so to have parameters around what we're working on. But it's basically entities or properties in which residents and community members lead in both governance and ownership. So we think about these models. There's iterations on these models. There's a lot of different types of shared equity are happening today, but the buckets we sort of think about are limited equity or affordable cooperatives, community land trusts with affordable housing, resident-owned communities, which are manufactured housing parks that own the land underneath as a cooperative, and then inclusionary housing programs, which are mixed income housing programs around the country. So why shared equity? Well, principally because shared equity housing provides permanently affordable ownership alternative to rental housing. There's a lot of affordable housing, but it's not always permanently or long-term affordable, and that's created many challenges in many communities, particularly as some of these properties come up for conversion and move back into the market. It prevents displacement in challenging or gentrifying markets, so you can retain people where they are instead of pushing them out. And it promotes owner occupancy and supports local workforce needs. And I know many of you are challenged by that now in terms of the workforce, particularly in escalating recreational areas and things like that. And these are long established models with demonstrated benefits. So we don't have to, you don't have to be new to be innovative, as we like to say. So housing wealth accumulation, renters versus both conventional home ownership and shared equity home ownership. I think this study back in 21, based on previous 20-year look at these various housing types, shows like you're not going to accumulate much wealth if that's what you're interested, or keeping wealth local if you're relying on the renting cycle. And more communities are finding more and more of their population renting. So that's a challenge if you have multi goals for your community, including keeping wealth local. The benefits of shared equity ownership, why it's kind of nice, is because it's both at the individual and at the community level. So it provides affordability, it provides stability, provides an opportunity to create wealth, both at the community and the personal level. And it also really increases engagement. When people own or have governance connections to their housing, they're much more likely to be engaged, civically engaged. As we know, that's critical right now. And it improves your personal mobility, your economic well-being, and one of the goals that Melissa was just talking about is livelihoods. So it sort of creates much more community engagement, and helps both the community and individuals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ariel Hirsch to talk about cooperatives.
Thanks, Mary, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ariel Hirsch, and I am the Director of Policy at UHAB. We are a New York City-based nonprofit. We've been around for over 50 years, and we work with over 1,200 limited equity or affordable cooperatives in New York City. And more recently, we also do consulting for cities and towns and localities across the nation that are interested in building out a very similar sphere of cooperative development to fit their own local needs. So, what is a cooperative? Mary shared, thank you, some of the basics, but a cooperative, any kind of cooperative, is a democratic and member-controlled, some kind of legal entity. And when we're talking about housing cooperatives, we're talking about entities that are owning and managing real estate in cooperative structures. Members own shares in a cooperation in the same way that you would own shares in a business, and because of that ownership, they have a stake in this case, the housing, and have the ability to make decisions about what happens in that building, in that housing. And this is not a new model of ownership or of tenure. These cooperatives have been around in the US since the early 1900s, and have been circulating in lots of different forms in many different localities since. On the next slide, so how does a housing cooperative work? Members or residents own shares in the corporation, which then owns the land and the buildings. Some cooperatives operate on leased land. There are a couple different models here, and that tenure of ownership gives the member the exclusive right, in this case, both to occupy a specific unit in the building and also the right to vote to decide on what happens around the general governance of that cooperative. Members elect a board of directors to govern the cooperative, and the cooperative, in this case, because it is focusing on housing, is also tasked with the administration, the day-to-day management and operations of the building or property. That might entail hiring a property manager, overseeing a lawyer, an accountant, all of these kinds of things. And on the next slide, so what Mary was speaking about in terms of the limited factor in a limited equity cooperative is really just what we mean to say affordable. And affordable cooperatives usually receive some kind of state or local sort of subsidies from their housing trust fund. It could be bond financing. It could be a number of different things that give them additional subsidy that's coming in that both help keep the buildings affordable in the long term, and inherent to their structure, they have some preservation of that affordability over time. So it's not affordability that exists only for the first occupants or residents of that co-op, but it's something that gets transferred over time, with some modest wealth creation in that sort of process. It's a tricky balance that we want to create wealth over time, and see folks really be able to gain that generational wealth. Some folks use limited equity cooperatives as a stepping stone to other forms of housing, market rate housing, single family homeownership. And also, we don't want the prices of this particular sort of like limited equity asset to go up so much that they become unaffordable to future generations of working families who might be looking for the same kinds of stability in this particular model. And so there's some balancing there that is also relatively dependent on localities and needs, and you'll see different kinds of the model adjust in slightly different ways. Let's see. Yeah, and then on the next slide, I think there's a good little breakdown on some of the benefits and challenges here. I think one of the big pieces, which Mary already mentioned, is really around lowering that barrier to access. Many limited equity cooperatives start off as rentals or are formed as communities, really looking at renters as the interested pool of folks who might mostly benefit from this kind of housing, because in some ways it can be more affordable than traditional homeownership, and also may act as a stepping stone to traditional homeownership. That is not to say that folks do not stay in limited equity cooperatives their whole lives and pass them on for generations. They absolutely do. But there are a couple factors that really lower those sort of barriers to entry around lower down payment costs, less reliance on individual credit ratings for working people who are trying to save up and come up with a down payment. And then there's this piece of that permanent affordability, which also really in this case means permanent stability. So the ability to stay where your costs are are stable, giving many of the benefits of, a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, but in this kind of housing that has slightly less barriers to entry. It also provides this opportunity for intergenerational wealth building. You can pass it on to your kids and your family members, and you can ensure that this stays as a generational asset in your family. And the last piece here is on democratic and resident control. This is, I think, the smallest form of like little d democracy that we get in, managing our buildings or our collective homes, our complexes together, gives folks real local sort of control over their environments. And we find that limited equity housing residents have much higher rates of civic participation in other parts of their lives, in their local ecosystems, their local economies, local politics, and all of these things help to create a thriving democracy that we want to see everywhere. There are, of course, also challenges to the model. The limited is true. It is limited. So there is always that balance. You are not necessarily going to accrue the same amount of wealth over time as you might from a market rate property. However, it's lower to purchase in, and it also tends to be a little bit more of a stable asset over time, whereas the housing market, as we know, over the last number of decades can fluctuate quite wildly. We see that limited equity cooperatives stay, modest but stable increases over time. So you may miss out on this larger sort of potential for massive wealth creation over the span of like one generation or one decade, but it may be more stable overall. We also find that there are, we're speaking about this because it's not something that a lot of folks know about and are deeply well versed in across the country. There are great organizations like the Cooperative Development Foundation. We are working more nationally these days, as well as my partners on this panel, to introduce more help with financing and technical assistance to partners who are working in many different localities across the country. But there is a relatively constrained pool of folks who really have the expertise and knowledge to both understand how to get a housing cooperative up and running and also how to sustain it in the long term. And that long-term piece here requires ongoing training and support. These are member-led, resident-owned communities, and so the residents will change over time. When they change or as people age and the co-op has different needs, folks need more training and support to understand how to shift in sort of changing market conditions, different building conditions, thinking about different environmental factors. And so all of that support is necessary to keep these models going, as I believe is true in all kinds of housing and our economic models. And of course, like any other kind of housing, it is a depreciating asset because you are sitting on something that gets wear and tear from the elements. And so understanding how to navigate that ongoing financing when you need to invest in a new roof, new siding, insulation for your building, and different kinds of management for the cooperative in the long term is something that's worth thinking about here as well. All right. I think we've gone over these, but just to do a quick highlight of why it might be worth really thinking about affordable housing cooperatives. We hit on that permanent affordability and matched with homeownership. Supporting this sort of transition for folks who are renting or may not have generational wealth or assets to draw on to really transition into stable and permanent housing that gives that opportunity for wealth creation in some ways as an alternative to renting, and that sort of piece of increased education, participation, sometimes health in being able to determine the conditions of your home, especially if you're coming out of a situation where you're renting, you don't have much control over those things. We see as a lot of the sort of benefits here. And one more note on the permanent affordability is that this piece is a feature and not a bug of the model. And so it minimizes some of those buy-in costs and stabilizes monthly expenses. And we often talk about this as a kind of social equity, as something that increases your purchasing power over time. When your housing costs are fixed and low, you have the ability to do things maybe you wouldn't do otherwise. You could choose a career that is perhaps a little bit less lucrative and still send your kids to a reasonable, good four-year college. You could save for your your own continuing education. You could pursue a fellowship or do something non-traditional or be able to care for your family members, things that come up in all of our lives as they shift over time, and having those stable housing costs, much in the way a 30-year fixed rate mortgage would do, allows folks to have that flexibility to really be able to live not just to pay rent or to pay their mortgage, but to do the thing that makes sense for them and for their lives. This says here that it doesn't directly address generational wealth. I think that, there's an open debate there. I would argue perhaps that it does, where there is a modest but real amount of generational wealth building, especially for families that are transitioning from being renter households, sometimes for many decades and across generations. It is not necessarily the same amount of generational wealth potential as there is in market rate homeownership, single family homeownership, but it provides many benefits that do increase wealth in communities over time. And yeah, it allows future members, we're doing that preservation piece. We're trying to ensure that folks can build generational wealth over the long run, and also trying to keep costs low enough and purchase prices low enough that the next generation and many future generations of homeowners will be able to benefit and truly have it meet the needs of working families. And it relies on some of those government subsidies to help keep going and serve the wider community. Thanks, Mary. On the next slide. So cooperatives do need supports in order to thrive. We talked about this a little bit. They require some of that ongoing technical assistance and training. Really, what we've been working on in much of our national work is helping localities to build an infrastructure to create and support cooperatives similar to what we've done in New York City over the last 50 years, but also what we've seen in Washington, D.C., in Minneapolis, and many smaller towns and localities, Burlington, Vermont, in a slightly different model, but very similar over time. And permanent affordability, we're realizing, also needs to be designed into these programs from the beginning. Many older cooperatives that were formed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were financed without this sort of future thinking sort of question. And so building this in from the beginning, especially in localities that are starting these programs sometimes for the first time, have a real ability to sort of meet those competing and very important needs around wealth creation and permanent affordability. And of course, these buildings are going to need training and other sorts of technical assistance to sustain them in the long run. This sort of comes back to the ecosystem question about really investing in the local supports that can help sustain these buildings in the long term. It's not sort of a one-off project. It's something that we want and we would love to see to be deeply embedded in communities and to be self-sustaining and supporting with the structures and the supports that many communities have already to support their economic development work and other kinds of very much needed initiatives. They have, yes, they have a slightly different, sorry, on the last slide. Yes. The last thing that I want to mention here is just that they do require ongoing city and state support, which, if this is something that's new for your community, can be a little bit of a transition. And so it's worth talking to your localities, your state, and your local government around what kinds of training and technical assistance might be possible, as well as tax exemptions and other kinds of low-cost financing for repairs that can help to sort of build and sustain this model. Thanks, Mary. And then on the next slide, there are a bunch of limited equity housing cooperatives across the country and really across North America, I should say, the US and Canada here. There are just over 160,000 in the United States, and they are not only concentrated in large cities like New York and DC and San Francisco, they are all across small towns and rural localities across the country. We did this survey about 10 years ago and have recently updated it and found with pretty phenomenal results that many of the cooperatives have managed to sustain themselves over the long term without a ton of local needs and support, but that buildings and cooperatives that started in the early years and maybe didn't have some of those lasting affordability protections sometimes do transition into market rate homeownership. We would love to see many more of those stay preserved in the long term, but think it's an incredible testament to the model, simply how many of them there are. Even as we've been talking, it's not super well known, and it's not something that sort of hits on the map when we think about our local housing landscapes often. I think that is everything except for a couple quick examples. I want to highlight one, and then I'm going to pass it back to Mary, who's been working on many national projects. I'll just talk quickly about Nashville, where there is much more recently a attempted purchase or working on a purchase of a group of properties in a sort of residential complex, sort of these low slung, sort of like ranch style connected homes across a small complex. And the folks out there who are working on this project were able to negotiate with a seller who was putting the complex up for sale and was able to find public financing and get a lot of local support to create what will become a limited equity cooperative on a community land trust. I'll talk about, well, James will talk about community land trusts in just a minute, so I'll save that for James. But it's a really interesting sort of scenario. I think this is the first one that will be coming to Nashville, which is a huge amount of support to really put behind some of the first projects here, and it will preserve current renters in their homes in this housing complex and help future owners at or below about 50% of median income stay and own their homes with a specific amount of outreach to formerly incarcerated women. And the financing that they've received for this project includes a $7 million grant from the Nashville Barnes Housing Trust Fund. Housing trust funds fund a lot of limited equity cooperative work, and the National Cooperative Bank, who's also a lender on a lot of cooperative projects nationwide. And they have a really fantastic group of technical assistance organizations locally who are starting to build up their cooperative ecosystem, including the Southeast Center for Cooperatives and the William Franklin Buchanan Community Development Corporation, as well as their local city government. And yeah, I think this is it's a really interesting project. I was chatting with the folks who have been working on this recently, and they reminded me that the tenants didn't know going into this that the building was going to be purchased with the intent to become a cooperative. And in that process, there was a lot of consternation about, will people be interested in this? Will they understand the model? Will this make sense to people? And they found out pretty quickly following the sale that there was a lot of interest from tenants in actually moving forward with this, and something that seems relatively abstract and perhaps a little bit alien to folks who have been renting maybe for several decades was actually something that made a lot of sense. You stay in your home, you gain modest wealth through limited equity, and you become a homeowner and transition in the home that you're already living in, rather than needing to go out and find credit and sources and a down payment for, a big step that takes you out of your home and out of your community. And so that ability also to create wealth while staying in place and staying local, I think, can't be overestimated here. I think I've spoken for too much, but I'll pass it on to Mary for a couple other examples.
Thank you, Ariel. That's great. Just wanted to talk about two other examples that there's been a lot of interest in, and just so folks know. So Ariel just talked about housing cooperatives, where the housing itself is the co-op, manages the co-op. There's a couple other models. There's a lot of different models of co-ops that you could bring into the housing arena. One is CSI.coop, which is in 4 states, and that operates sort of as an umbrella development co-op. So the co-op itself is doing the development of the individual buildings, but the individual buildings, they have 65 buildings. Each building is sort of a separate entity and a separate project. It's managed by the tenants. In this case, they're renters, and they're all seniors at around the 50% median income range. But what it does is it allows the umbrella co-op to constantly be reinvesting in those cooperatives. They provide in those buildings, they provide supportive services, etc. And the tenants elect the board to the development co-op. So they really have the agency ownership stake, even though if they don't have title ownership. In a situation with seniors, they might not be as interested in wealth creation as they might be in stability and maintaining cost. So there are 7,000 units across these 4 states, as I mentioned. Another model that's come up is the multi-stakeholder real estate cooperative. This is an example. Common Grounds Cooperative was built in Traverse City, Michigan, rural area, but recreational, so very seasonal. Um, but they knew that they had needs, particularly with seasonal housing, with some retail childcare. So the community got together and formed a real estate cooperative. I think they have over 1,000 members of the community who invested in this project. And then they have different rights. Like I think there's an Airbnb, and if you're a member of the co-op, you get a discount or you get, first right into that or for your family. And then they have, some workforce housing. And on the ground floor, it's commercial. They have members of the co-op are actually retail folks. Like there's a childcare co-op, there's a cafe. It's just a very interesting, very much led by what the community needed. And they used as part of, here's sort of a breakdown, but they used in terms of the financing, USDA loan guarantee for a large bulk of it. And this is the BNI program, rural program. And it used to be 100% commercial, but they recently changed the rules where you could have 51, as long as you have 51% commercial, you could use the rest for housing. So, and they're looking at actually developing more housing with these different tools now that they've sort of done this. They did to raise some of the private equity, they did 3 crowdfunding offers, and they got a lot of money from that. So people are actually investing and there's a rate of return. So it's a really interesting way of a community saying, we have an issue, we want to do it. And it was built fairly quickly. And they also found that they became sort of the support entity for the commercial nonprofits, the retail kind of nonprofits, like the child care. They were sort of partners with the child care, developing their space and developing their business. So it meets a lot of needs. So I'm going to turn it over to James now to talk about community land trusts.
Awesome. Thank you. And can everyone hear me okay? No, we didn't.
Mhm.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here and share a little bit about community land trusts, building on what Ariel just shared and Mary just presented on. I think you'll hear a lot of themes being reiterated. So I'm glad to go second in that regard, and I'll try to be efficient here in my use of time. Again, my name's James Yellen. I'm the Director of Technical Assistance at Grounded Solutions Network. We are a national nonprofit organization, a membership-based nonprofit organization with over 275 members, all supporting the sector that we call lasting affordable housing. So housing that is designed and sustained to last for multiple generations, both as a physical structure, but in terms of the affordability that it provides to those living there. And a lot of the work we do is focused on community land trusts, although it's not the only model that we support. Um, when I talk or when we talk generally about community land trusts, we always find it helpful to ground it a little bit in a discussion of the roots of the model, particularly given what's going on today and the current connection between the challenges that folks were addressing back in the 60s, 50s and 60s when the model was being developed, and what folks are grappling with in communities in the country today, particularly displacement, disparities in wealth and land and asset ownership. So really briefly, the first land trust, the first CLT in the United States was launched in Albany, Georgia, about 3 hours from Atlanta. It was very much a product of the civil rights era and activists and farmers of this time who were rejecting very racist and exploitative conditions that saw Black workers in particular subjected to, through sharecropping, through Jim Crow laws, preventing folks from building wealth, acquiring property, or even being able to stay on their own land where they were investing so much of their time, energy, and resources. And so drawing from models all over the world, India, England, elsewhere, folks, including Slater King, Martin Luther King's cousin, came together to develop this new model of how we could collectively own and steward land. In 1969, New Communities, Inc. was launched. The land trust acquired 5,000 acres of farmlands in this part of Georgia and used this ground lease model. This was sort of a novel introduction of how a ground lease could be used in the United States to help a small network of farmers to raise crops on their own collectively owned land. And so that's its origin story, but the model has spread significantly, and we'll talk about what that looks like right now. and all the different ways that land trusts are used. So it's a very flexible model. I think that's a key ingredient here. I know we're focused mostly on housing today, but it should be pointed out that land trusts, I like to think of them as sort of a container for developing and stewarding land for a wide variety of community serving purposes. So as you can see from the graphic here, that model of separating the land from the improvements, the land from the structure, allows land trusts, which are typically 501c3 nonprofits, not always, but most of the time, they can acquire, just like any other sort of nonprofit housing developer or community development entity, they can acquire and develop housing, single family homes. Building on Ariel's presentation, you could have a limited equity housing co-op stewarded within a community land trust. Many are also doing commercial space to provide stable and affordable retail and commercial spaces for small and local businesses, community spaces, even farming or open land, urban agriculture. The key ingredient again is that dual ownership arrangement where the improvements and the control and use of those improvements are separated from the land beneath it through a 99-year ground lease. That ground lease is the thing that connects everything all together. The activities of the land trust and the responsibilities of whoever owns and is operating the improvements on the land are sort of bound by that ground lease, which really lays out everything from, you know, income targeting, resale formulas, like how much the appreciation on the asset can be capped, what kind of uses can be done on that land, um, things like taking out a second mortgage. Like a lot of these responsibilities of the CLT homeowner are kind of captured in the ground lease and other documents. I want to briefly talk about governance and function of the CLT. This is sort of the classic model, and it's not always what you'll see out in the wild. But this idea of community being a really critical part, I think, is important to emphasize again. And that's done in a few different ways. Primarily through this idea of having a what's called a tripartite board that really prioritizes residents, not only of the homes or properties that are under the land trust, the leaseholders, renters, etc., but also broader community members that live in the service area of the community land trust. Those tend to be, they comprise about 2/3 of the board in the traditional model. That third slot of public stakeholders is usually made up of technical experts, funders, mission-aligned stakeholders, anyone else that can bring certain professional skills to support the work. But again, sharing that power with folks that live in the community, live within the land trust is a big part of it. As I mentioned, the CLT also holds land and the subsidy interest, which is really key. That really comes down to the stewardship. So when we talk about stewardship, we're really talking about the articulation of responsibilities, an ongoing presence, a set of policies and procedures that will guide how real estate is owned and developed, how residents are supported as homeowners, as board members, as members of the community to build their capacity, building again on a lot of what Ariel was sharing about the co-op model. And then the subsidy itself, right, which I think will be important to a lot here. The CLT model is designed in part to ensure that any upfront investment, whether that's from the public sector or philanthropy, any investment that will create that affordability, buy down that affordability, stays within the land and can serve generation after generation of residents and homeowners on that land. And so maintaining compliance, maintaining the physical structure of the property, making sure that everything on the financial side is looking healthy and strong, and residents aren't ever getting close to foreclosure or any sort of risk of default. That's a big part of what the CLT does as well. A central question and tension of the CLT model is this balancing act between individual and community benefits. And again, like the co-op model, it's really about trying to find the sweet spot that makes the most sense for the residents or community you're serving. Again, this is about creating some opportunity for wealth building, a lot of the benefits of a home ownership, including the control one has over their home, ability to make changes or alterations, know that you have a long-term stake, that there isn't someone that can evict you or arbitrarily raise your rents. You do build some wealth. You can, there's been studies that need to be updated. It's usually around $15,000 to $20,000 of wealth that's built over over the first 5 or 6 years. And of course, the longer you're in the home and you're buying down your mortgage, more equity is built over time. Again, that appreciation is just capped usually by a formula. It could be tied to inflation. It could be tied to area median income, things like that. But you are building some wealth over time. But perhaps even more importantly, it is, and like a co-op, can be inheritable. So you're able to pass that down to the next in line in your family and keep the home within in your family and community for generations to come. It's also a much more stable form of home ownership. We saw this in particular during the Great Recession some years ago, where delinquency and default rates were a fraction of what we saw, not just of subprime mortgages, but even in the private market overall. So very, very, very low delinquency and foreclosure rates within land trust homeowners, in part because of that stewardship role that the CLT is playing. We can go to the next slide. So these, I'll try to hurry up a little bit. This sort of just drives home the access to home ownership that this model provides, like the others that you'll see here. It's really about creating new opportunities to own and control housing for historically excluded populations. And so this data comes from the census that Grounded Solutions Network conducts. We did a big study a few years ago to really dig into the portfolios of land trust and shared equity organizations, and we found much higher rates of participation and shared equity homeownership among first-time home buyers, among households with young children, among single mothers. If you go to the next slide, you can see as well how this kind of plays out. Oh, looks like maybe some of the content didn't come through, but how this plays out, there it is, in terms of the racial composition. And so we know that there's a big racial wealth gap and big gaps in home ownership rates with groups of different backgrounds. And at least within the context of the shared equity home ownership broadly around this country, much higher rates for these communities that have otherwise been shut out or lacked opportunity to become homeowners in the private market. So zooming to the national level, just giving you all a sense of scale, this is a relatively small part of the overall housing sector, but a really important and growing part of that housing sector. And we now know that there are over 340 CLTs, probably more like 350 or even greater than that. We hear about new CLTs being formed every day, pretty much. They collectively steward at least 50,000 homes. This is on top of the 160,000 co-op units that Ariel presented on. So we're seeing growth in the field. It's really exciting right now. There are concentrations of CLTs in certain states like California, Washington, New York, Florida. But again, growth is across the country. Almost every state in the United States now is home to at least one CLT. So we're really excited to see that. And if you're wondering why is there growth, like what are the potential reasons for that? Here are a few. We know that there's a significant issue of loss of affordable units, over 300,000 units of subsidized homes. The homes that are restricted by whether it's tax credits or federal grant programs that have either 5, 10, 15, 30-year affordability restrictions or affordability periods. We are losing those homes every day. 300,000 just in the next 5 years, but if you look farther out in time, there are many more that are at risk. So this long-term affordability model is really key to addressing that and sort of stemming the tide of loss. We know that it's never been more unattainable to own a home in this country, and meanwhile, renting isn't so cheap either, right? So more people are rent burdened than ever before. The median home price continues to rise while interest rates remain stubbornly high. So affordability or home ownership is greater, increasingly out of reach for folks. And meanwhile, we're still living to some extent in the shadows of the Great Recession. Foreclosures struck millions in this country, erasing generations of wealth in some cases. So that sort of continues to hang over and give people motivation to find alternatives that are more stable and securing that and sustaining wealth for folks. And then finally, just this idea of community control, people being at the center of their own destiny when it comes to housing, not at the mercy or the whims of the market or other forces that might be in play, but really putting that sense of independence back in folks' hands. And that really has broad support. On the next slide, I think it's on there, there's a snapshot of a study that found that the idea of permanently affordable housing that's insulated from the fluctuations of the market was broadly supported by people across the political spectrum. 60% of Republicans supported the idea of voting for a candidate that supported permanent affordability. So it resonates, right? Increasing access to home ownership, giving people more of a chance to make roots and grow and become economically mobile in their community. It's a popular message, and I think that's part of why we're starting to see more interest in it. There are increasingly local and state level legislative efforts as well. We're seeing innovations in the field, folks experimenting with different models, multifamily, pairing it with co-ops, pairing it with mobile home parks, et cetera. So just a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity that's helping drive some of this growth. I want to close with some content that is hopefully most relevant to the folks in this conversation, which is how can local government support CLTs? And a lot of that echoes, again, ways that local government and different forms of government really can support co-ops. One of the most important things, though, is just getting educated and becoming more familiar and comfortable with the model. Um, this has been around for a long time. It's very stable. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac provide more. Will buy mortgages issued for community land trust homes. It's very standardized, and yet we know that one of the barriers to growing the model and shared equity models in general is a lot of folks simply don't know about them, don't understand them, so they tend to be excluded from a lot of popular programs, either explicitly or implicitly because funding and policies are not designed for them. They tend to align more with the needs of tax credit finance rentals that is more common in the affordable housing field. And so that's a big part of it. But beyond becoming familiar and supportive and just curious about how these models work and how they can be scaled up, there's a lot of things that local government can do, from providing startup funds for operations, which is really important. I'm going to turn my light on because I'm realizing how dark it's getting. I'm in Chicago where it's a storm is coming in. Um, Supporting a pipeline of development by identifying developable sites, whether that's land bank sites, tax foreclosed sites, vacant surplus land owned by public entities, finding ways to prioritize CLTs and other shared equity models in the disposition of those sites has been really helpful in a lot of parts of the country. Um, Connecting folks that are coming through homeowner preparation courses, HUD certified counselors, et cetera, to these opportunities, is making sure people are aware and they're tied into a pipeline of potential buyers. Um, Bringing in consultants and bringing in other experts like a UHAB, like a Grounded Solutions Network, not to shamelessly promote our work, like others out there that provide important expertise that may not exist on your staff, right? You don't have to develop this all on your own. There are lots of folks out there that want to collaborate and support the growth of these models locally. Property taxation is big, so making sure that property taxes are aligned with the restricted value of the homes rather than being based on market value. That's like an ongoing challenge is, if your home is restricted and you can't actually reap the full benefit of market appreciation, arguably you shouldn't have to pay property taxes that are based on that market value. And so many states around the country have either passed legislation or are passing legislation to right size that. And local government is a big player in implementing that, from the county assessors to policymakers at the city and town level. And then, of course, just funding for development. Making sure that allocations of block grants, as well as any new revenue that's generated for affordable housing, can be used to fund the bricks and mortar of building these homes. Not always the case in a lot of jurisdictions where those dollars tend to, again, go towards the larger tax credit finance deals or homeowner repair programs that don't bring in any affordability. Just carving out some more space. And on the next slide, you'll see an example of one jurisdiction and one community land trust that I think really exemplifies a lot of this all coming together in a really nice way. So Proud Ground Community Land Trust, they're based in Portland. They were formed in 1999. They started as the first citywide permanently affordable homeownership initiative, and they are now the largest provider of these opportunities, not just in Portland, but in the Pacific Northwest, serving 6 counties, They've got over 550 homes in their portfolio, several hundred more in the pipeline, and several hundred more households have been served as homes have turned over. And a lot of their success and growth comes in part from these partnerships with local, state, and regional government. They were fortunately provided some early operating support to actually staff up and build capacity before they were bringing in revenue from selling homes and getting ground lease fees. They were donated tax foreclosed land and otherwise made competitive or more competitive for public land that was coming up for disposition. So again, getting land into the trust and finding ways to do that is really critical, because then once that land is there, it stays affordable forever and you can develop and build on it and continue to tie that subsidy into subsequent homeowners and folks that are using the land. Portland and the metro region in general, I want to highlight that. That's an MPO, the Portland Metro. It might be a council of government as well. I forget if it's integrated, but they passed a regional housing bond, and some of the funds from that are supporting community land trust home ownership. There was recently $10 million that went across 4 projects serving 87 households of permanently affordable home ownership, all made possible by that bond. The local government has also identified home and CDBG and other resources that can be used for the land trust there. And then streamlining, zoning reform, in this case, getting exempted from impact fees. These are other ways to lower the barrier that Portland and that region has really been utilizing to support the growth of land trusts. And so that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully I came in okay time-wise. And just to leave you on ways that Grounded Solutions supports the field. We do a whole bunch of things. I lead the technical assistance team, working with a lot of housing providers, local government, state government, philanthropy to design and implement these types of models. But we really try to support all aspects of the ecosystem to the extent that we can nationally through research, capital, data management practices, training, federal advocacy. We have a membership that supports many folks that are doing this work through additional member benefits. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for the time. And if you have any questions or want to learn more, continue to explore these models, please feel free to reach out. I have my contact information on the next slide. And we'll share this all, of course, after the session.
Great. Thank you so much, James. So we'll turn it over to David Sanchez now.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for being here today and for taking the time to learn about some of the solutions that might work in your communities and in your regions as you're looking to address affordable housing shortages. And I'm so delighted to have gone after Ariel and James, who provided such great information about how cooperatives work, about how the community land trust model works. I'm here today as a representative of ROC USA. ROC stands for Resident Owned Communities, and we specifically work to apply the cooperative model in manufactured housing communities across the country. And so I'm going to spend probably more time talking about manufactured housing as a source of affordable housing, and a little less time talking about the cooperative structures. Although we do, we take great joy in the resident-owned cooperatives that own and operate the parks. And I will spend a little bit of time talking about that, because how could I not? So manufactured housing is a little bit of a forgotten stepchild of the affordable housing sphere. In large part, in contrast to many other forms of affordable housing, what's notable about manufactured housing is how it's been it is affordable without any government subsidy, at least in its current configuration. And so, policymakers in a time of, affordable housing shortages spreading across the country are looking to manufactured housing as an important part of the housing supply solution in their communities. I mean, in previous jobs I've worked as part of the federal government trying to strengthen the policies surrounding manufactured housing. And at ROC USA, what we specifically focus on is preserving manufactured housing communities that already exist today. So I do think that there's a lot to be said for factory-built housing, of which manufactured housing is a specific form. It is specifically factory-built housing built to a code propagated by HUD, the federal government. So it's the only national building code. Well, maybe there are you could argue other things with national building codes, but the only federal building code, in effect, in the United States. These are commonly known as, mobile homes, or you might know them as trailers. Since 1976 is when HUD established its definition and its regulations governing the program. And since then, we've seen them grow into, high quality, affordable units that with energy efficiency, really high, really quality housing at a good price, despite, missteps, I would say, in earlier decades when it comes to the quality and construction and weather worthiness of certain manufactured homes. So we are particularly focused on the preservation of manufactured housing and in communities. So, some people can own manufactured homes, placed on their land that they own, but typically a lot of them live in mobile home communities or trailer parks. And in that structure, homeowners own the home, but not the land underneath the unit. Despite being called mobile homes, manufactured homes are actually extremely difficult to move and typically aren't. People who own communities have recognized that they have a little bit of a captive audience when it comes to the people who live in manufactured housing communities. And so we've seen a dramatic upsurge in investor interest and private equity interest in manufactured housing communities across the country. In many cases, like the lot rents that are charged to people in trailer parks have gone up hundreds and hundreds of dollars. These are low income populations. So, people are looking for solutions that will break this dynamic, that will preserve manufactured housing as affordable housing. And we're a national nonprofit that does this. We facilitate the purchase of the communities by the residents themselves. So when communities come up for sale, either because there's a willing seller of the manufactured housing community, or because the state has passed enabling legislation that gives residents an opportunity to purchase, we come in with technical assistance, and if the numbers all work out, and if the residents want to form a cooperative, we help them buy the land, and we provide financing through a CDFI arm. So that is what my organization does. And I know I'm not really following the slides super well, so I will be getting back,
Okay.
in that direction. If you go back one slide, Mary, so Rock USA currently serves about 350 communities across 21 states, and we do this with 9 partners. So we have 9 partner organizations that are cooperative development centers of various kinds that specialize in market development and technical assistance in states. And Rock USA itself also operates direct assistance in a couple of states where we don't have devoted partners. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Mary, when talking about, kind of like why the impact that rocks have and why we think that they're an important solution to the affordable housing shortage in this country. Residents democratically as a co-op govern the decisions about management and operation of the trailer park. And critically, they make those decisions governing the lot rent. So it is really an important, a strong way to break the cycle of the rapid, price appreciation in terms of rent being charged to homeowners and communities. We've done studies and found that rocks on average raise their rents about 1% per year versus 6% per year in the industry average. Over 5 years of ownership, that translates into site rents being $600 a year below market. And in some communities, certainly the difference between the rock rent and the private market can be even higher. So residents are able to spend less on lot rent. There's less risk of being displaced from that. Also, we've seen in a few places that the comparative market advantage of having lower lot rents means that there's more demand from home buyers in rocks. And so breaking what is kind of a commonly cited pitfall of manufactured housing, that it depreciates, that, it's not like a stick-built home where it's connected to the land that goes up in value over time. It's not a good wealth building strategy. We have some evidence coming from the state of New Hampshire that homes and rocks appreciate at much better rates and hold their value much better than manufactured homes that are in other landless communities. So we think it's a really, really good solution to some of the really unique challenges or the unique dynamics that exist in the manufactured housing market, and some of the unique pressures that really exist in this market as private investors kind of scoop in and buy up parks all over the country. Next slide, Mary. So yeah, our work at Rock USA is oriented around a lot of different things. It's about supporting rocks, supporting the resident-owned cooperatives manage their cooperatives correctly, and in a way that they're going to ultimately be successful, in a way that they can plan for infrastructure needs of the community. A common feature of manufactured housing communities is the infrastructure is privately owned, meaning that it's provided by the landlord and owner and property owner rather than by municipal governments. And as a result of that, and there typically hasn't been government support for the infrastructure. A lot of it is in quite poor condition. So a lot of the work that we do as Rock USA is help residents figure out how to plan for, finance, and execute infrastructure projects to make their manufactured housing communities, essentially great places to live for the long term. And then we have a whole bunch of folks who work directly in the states, doing market development, helping find willing sellers who are interested in selling to the residents, or taking advantage of state opportunity to purchase laws that specifically give manufactured housing residents the right to put a bid on the community when it comes up for sale in the private market. So, I would ask as you all think about where you live across the country and the kind of the regional work and economic development work that you collaborate, that you spearhead, I'd ask you to think if manufactured housing and manufactured housing communities are an important part of your affordable housing stock. And I'd ask you to start asking questions about whether you're seeing the affordability of those communities damaged by kind of the increasing market interest in the ownership of these communities. And we'd love to talk to anyone about what's happening in their communities, about kind of what communities are better candidates for becoming resident-owned communities. We've seen just, I think, remarkably positive results in terms of preserving the affordability and stability of these communities, and starting to make some real investments so that resident-owned communities are kind of just lovely places to live, just like any other part of a community. So I think with that, let me stop and turn it back to Mary, and then I think we're probably going to open it up to questions if I have that right. I'm sorry, I forgot to talk through my last slide. Thank you, Mary. I did want to provide one example. And so in 2012, we, as Rock USA, we helped, along with our regional affiliate, Casa of Oregon, convert a 76-lot mobile home community on the Clackamas River in Oregon into a resident-owned community. They bought the park for $5 million. And through their stewardship of the park, through efficient use of their funds, through hiring the right property managers and things like that, they've been able to keep their site fees more or less steady. And just to give you the number, it's the site rent that each homeowner pays to hold their manufactured home in the community is about $590. The Financial Times actually did a story in 2020 profiling the life in the Clackamas River Community Cooperative compared to another manufactured house community down the street owned by Equity Lifestyle, which is a big corporate owner of manufactured homes kind of across the country. You'll see them in many states. The Financial Times piece spent a lot of time talking to residents about the lackluster property management that was coming at the same time that site fees increased from 638 to 828, over a 5-year period. I do think it is useful to highlight that ROCs can do a lot to preserve affordable housing in kind of this really important but often less talked about part of our affordable housing market here in America.
Great. Thank you, David. We just put James alluded to this, and I think everybody has about what local officials can do, and we just have some, engagement and collaborations with community outreach and awareness. A lot of this has been touched on legislative, regulatory, tax abatement rules, TOPA, just keeping an eye on all those things that could support this type of ownership is really important, because a lot of times that's what holds things up, is that you might have some local rules or laws that you don't even know about. Low income housing tax credit, properties you might have that are converting, or maybe you support through the QAPs, more ownership models, and of course funding support, and then identify opportunities if you're seeing things on the horizon, and maybe talk to people about those. And then we just have a couple 2 slides on some resources where you can get information, including everyone here, their organizations, but these might help you. Again, if you have any questions, you have everyone's emails and all these resources to get you started. There's a lot more, but of course, don't want to overwhelm. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Melissa, who I think is going to manage the Q&A. And I'm going to stop sharing. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so you can
Yeah.
look at the questions.
Yeah, no, this is thank you all. That was a whirlwind of information. As I said in the chat, we're going to share the slides with everyone, and you can dig into them a little bit more, but this is the time for questions. If you have any, thank you, James. I saw you answered someone's question in the chat, so thank you for that. And I feel like you can put them in the chat, or feel free to unmute. I think we can just kind of chat. I guess I'll start, um, because NATO is made up of regional economic development organizations. I'm curious about what kinds of things they can be doing to support, or either look for these opportunities or support things that are already happening. I mean, I heard you, David, say I think from that perspective is like, what kinds of manufactured housing communities do you have in your region, as kind of an inventory seems like maybe the first step. But yeah, for all of you, are there things that our members, economic development districts can be doing to at least, understand where they can fit into these ideas?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in first, and then I'd love to, of course, hear what James and Ariel think. I do think this is certainly not the case everywhere, and there are certainly governments that pay a lot of attention to their affordable manufactured housing stock. Whether that is units or particularly manufactured housing communities. But you would or you wouldn't be surprised how many how many governments will write about the affordable housing landscape in their communities and not take the time to focus on manufactured housing, to learn about the kind of unique pressures on the affordable housing, that affordable housing stock in many areas. And so we do think it's actually just really important to know, what are the communities, who owns them, do you have a sense of whether they're transacting every few years or whether they have steady ownership? Do you have a sense of whether site rents are increasing dramatically or not? And that can really, I think, help inform, kind of your sense of urgency on the issue. We're increasingly seeing, a loss of affordability in the sector, but part of that, there's no reason to act until you understand, what you're acting on. So I think that's a really, really important first step.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful. Mary or James, I know we lost Ariel, but
Oh,
any
So I guess,
yeah.
well, I think the land, to the extent that EDDs can support land management practices,
Mhm.
um, building on David's point, it's, doing an analysis or inventory of available development sites where there are opportunities to prioritize disposition. I mean, that's a big thing that we are doing a lot of work on with land banks, with school districts, with other public agencies that may not be directly connected to housing, but have a common interest in supporting housing stability among their constituents and among their residents, right? So housing stability is such a critical part of economic development. It's hard to start a new job or a business or get educated or do any of these other things if you have unstable housing, if your rents are going up, if your taxes are going up on your home. So yeah, prioritizing sites for sale, doing where possible and it's allowable, doing below market dispositions, or if there's a scoring system for helping these mission-driven housing providers, whether that's a ROC or a CLT co-op, be competitive. So that's one. And I would say just that convening power and continuing to socialize and bring these models into conversation in spaces where they might not otherwise come up, because awareness and getting that familiarity is so critical to any of these models becoming more mainstream. And EDDs play a big role in that as a regional actor that can bring lots of people together across sectors.
And I'll just add that I think taking stock, but also we've seen a lot of interest, like in smaller towns, looking at their buildings as, they might have some empty buildings, and as opposed to just looking at them as potential blight, you can look at them as potential opportunity. But as people have said, just taking inventory of everything and really shifting the focus from these are our public assets to be used for the community, as opposed to what a lot of communities do. These are public assets to be held until a higher price or a developer comes in. And I think that shift, and we're seeing that shift more, really taking stock of what's there and thinking about all your goals. And in smaller communities, doing it intentionally and with more community engagement earlier.
That's a really good point. I mean, I feel like I feel like there's so many underutilized assets in some of our communities that could be repurposed as housing. I mean, we're seeing that with like shopping malls and schools and churches, and yeah, they're all, or defunct churches, not functioning churches, um, but yeah, I think, and that is a key piece of wealth creation also, is finding those underutilized assets to repurpose for new ways. So I think that's cool. Yeah. I'm not, anybody else have a question? Oh, thank you. Thank you, James. Um, That's great. So yeah, please check the chat. There's all sorts of interesting resources in there that we've all been kind of putting in there. Any other questions? Any questions from our audience? I'm happy to ask more questions, but anything in your own communities that come to mind? Anything? Um, yeah. Well, I do think, I mean, I think EDDs are in a great position to, I guess what you've all said is right. They are conveners, they're facilitators of these kinds of conversations, and to me that's the starting point. But yeah.
Haley asked, a really good question just in the chat right now about, what about how, how, I don't know. She says, I'm curious about stewarding the relationship and trust between cooperative residents. And, I will say, so I haven't spent a long time in cooperative development. I have more of a housing policy background. It is both can be an extreme challenge in some communities to get people to work together, and it can also be quite magical how, the task of coming together to purchase the community you live in and empowering yourselves to govern that community can bring people together. So it is certainly a challenge in some places. I would actually imagine that Mary probably has a lot more to say about this, based on her career. But yeah,
For cooperatives, it governance does across all cooperatives. Governance is probably the biggest challenge, because you always have individuals. But I'd say that what we're seeing lately, particularly in the housing arena, and particularly with an aging population, is that we're seeing more and more people looking to get support. And, you know, the number of single-headed or the number of single households is really increased exponentially. I think something like 30 to 40%. So you have individuals who are aging and they're thinking, boy, you know, I think I'd like some support. So they're looking to these models too. We've had proposals from boomer co-ops, and I think you're seeing people at the local level are getting more and more, given the climate problems, given the housing, but also all the other challenges we're dealing with. The people are looking very locally for support, and when you want that, and that's part of what you want, it tends to be better. We don't, when it's thrust upon you, it doesn't work as well. But sometimes that's the easiest way to do it. But if it comes organically from a group, because a lot of it, the key is what you have has done so successfully is organizing. You have to spend a lot of time on the organizing, the early connections of people. But I'd say it's like condos or anything. As someone said, you know, you tell me how co-ops can work well, and then we'll put it into our condo. So it's whenever you have groups of people, but again, as David said, it can be great. It's just always a challenge, but at least it's people working together.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer. And maybe I'm just in a little bit more of a pessimistic mindset about people's willingness to cooperate, but I think given the structures that you guys introduced is kind of like a great way to say these are some things that actually can work for cooperation and sort of introducing people to those ideas. So thank you.
Yeah, there are a lot of great stories, and I'm sure you can find them on all their websites too of places where it has worked. But thanks for the question, Haley.
I
Uh,
I also think just given the audience and given the importance of economic development, like being part of a co-op, being part of a community land trust board, any kind of collective decision-making body like that is overseeing a budget and bylaws and stewarding real estate assets. Like these are, on one hand, significant responsibilities that we should remember and keep in mind that folks are often volunteering essentially to do them. Um, but there are also tremendous opportunities to grow skills. I myself was able to participate on the board of a land trust and learned a lot about, you know, audits and budgets and city compliance and things that I think are transferable in the professional world as well. So to the extent that that is part of it, and in highlighting that, I think that's one of the more like clear benefits that can come out of this kind of work, and maybe also a way to build some community.
Great. Yeah, I'm gonna share my last couple of slides, but please, if folks have questions, please ask them. I just wanted to, before too many people shove off, just since this is a key part of wealth creation, I just wanted to share not only the original, the comprehensive WealthWorks website, but also the NATO's wealth creation website, which has a lot of wealth creation reports, discussions of local ownership and control and value chains, and lots of training materials and other webinars. And again, thank you to EDA for supporting the Economic Development District Community of Practice, which this is a part of, and you'll be able to find it on the website. And there are lots of other really amazing resources that are coming out of the Community of Practice, so take a look. NATO news comes out every week, and that's how we publicize a lot of these things. So if you want to get on that list, or if you aren't on that list, that's and then me. But I'm also happy to kind of keep the chat open if people do have questions. I don't want to belabor it though. But I really want to thank Mary and James and David and Ariel for talking to us today. It's just fascinating. I've been interested in cooperative models for a very long time. It is as I keep telling people at NATO, it is the year of the cooperative. So I feel like it's super timely. And right.
Thanks for that plug. I forgot the International Year of the Cooperative. Thanks,
It's
Melissa.
been on my mind, so I keep talking about it. They make fun of me at NATO for that, but it is, and as it should be. It's pretty timely. So for everything happening right now. So yeah, but thanks for joining us, and thank you all for sharing your knowledge with us. And we'll do it again soon. And
Sounds good.
please fill out the survey if you can, if you don't mind. It would be really helpful. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you all. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you.